Once upon a time, a battle was fought between the Devas and the Asuras. And Vepachiti told his colleagues, his warriors, if they won, they should bring Sakka, the lord of the Devas, to him bound by his limbs and neck. And Sakka told his warriors that if they won, they should bring Vepachiti to him bound by his limbs and neck. And the Devas won, so they did that. They brought Vepachiti bound by his limbs and neck into Sakka's presence. And he stayed that way, he stayed bound, unless he had the thought, the Devas are righteous, the Asuras are not. I will stay right here. And suddenly, the shackles released, disappeared, and he got lots of sensual pleasure. But when he thought, no, these people are bad. The Devas are bad, unrighteous. The Asuras are righteous. I want to go there. Well, then he found himself bound by his limbs and neck, and the 5 cords of heavenly sensual pleasure disappeared. That's how subtly Vepachiti was bound, but the bonds of Mara are even more subtle than that. The Buddha here is talking about Mara, and he had quite a relationship with Mara. They had a very close relationship, actually. They spoke many times, and their conversations are, to me, some of the most interesting conversations in the entire canon. They had many conversations. But the first one that I know of came before the Buddha was the Buddha, before he was awakened, when he was still, as they put it, just an unenlightened bodhisattva. So he grew up with the 5 cords of sensual pleasure. Seeing what he wanted to see, hearing what he wanted to hear, smelling what he wanted to smell, tasting what he wanted to taste, and feeling what he wanted to feel. Of course, he lived 2,500 years ago, and so even he, as a prince, 2,500 years ago, didn't have as much sensual pleasure as everyone here grew up with. It's true. He didn't have a shower that you could just turn on, just like that. For example, he didn't have food from all around the world. He couldn't just go to a Chinese restaurant and then an Italian restaurant. He didn't have YouTube, so he could see whatever he wanted to see whenever he wanted to see it. So, even though he didn't have as much self-indulgence as we grew up with, he had quite a bit of ability to indulge himself. And there came a day when he left all of that pleasure, and he realized on the streets of Kapilavastu that people get sick, people get old, people die. And he realized that he would get sick, would get old, and would die. And that to him was terrifying. For the first time, he realized, first time in his whole life, he saw a sick person and an old person and a dead person. Now, any reasonable person would ask, could that possibly be true? Could it be true that he had actually never seen a sick person, old person, or a dead person? Doesn't seem likely somehow. Well, I would ask you this. Have you ever seen a sick person, an old person, or a dead person? Perhaps you have, because you're sitting here, but most people have not. Even if they've been with sick people, old people, and dead people, it's very difficult to actually see the significance of that. Nowadays, we are like Shuddhodana, the Buddha's father. constantly trying to protect ourselves and others from a realization that there's such a thing as death. The official curriculum in elementary school, at least in Vermont, of the life cycle of a living thing, it has 3 parts. There are 3 parts of the life cycle. A being, whatever that is, animal, for example. An animal is born, that's the first part. They grow up, that's the second part. They have offspring, that's the third part. This is the life cycle. This is what is taught in our elementary schools here. I know someone, who some of you know, Lyda, who teaches quite a bit in schools, and she couldn't help but ask, when she was told to teach this curriculum, what about death? And they said, well, that would be very uncomfortable to talk about. Besides, it's not really part of life anyway. I mean, death isn't life. Life is what isn't death. So we don't talk about that. When I go into schools, I make a point of talking about it. Yes? Have to. I go into a first grade classroom and I'll say, so, let's practice breathing. Very good. And when do you breathe, everyone? And then that's actually a hard question for a first grader. When do you breathe? But eventually they figure it out. They say, well, no matter what you're doing, you're breathing. And I said, exactly. And when do you not breathe? It doesn't take them nearly as long to figure it out. And they shout it. They're not stupid. When you're dead, they say. You got it. And the teacher stops breathing. So we're like Shuddhodana, the Buddha's father. We try to tell everyone there's no such thing as death, don't worry about it. You'll be fine, just get power. That's all you need to worry about. But it didn't work. The Bodhisattva, Siddhartha, Gautama, realized that we die, that in fact he dies, and he couldn't take it. He was terrified. He entered a state of absolute urgency and desperation, and his whole life fell apart just like that. And he saw that someone was training in a spiritual way in order to overcome the problem of birth and death, and he decided that he would do the same. And so he left home, and he trained under 2 teachers who taught him meditation, actually very skillfully. They were both excellent teachers, to whom he was grateful. And he kept them in mind, actually, all the way until when they died. Had a very good relationship with them. And nonetheless, wasn't fully satisfied. He didn't feel that the ultimate problem had been resolved by that training, and so he entered ascetic training, and he practiced self-mortification for a number of years. Hurt himself very badly, and was very weak, emaciated. And eventually, while he was trying to drink out of a river, he fell into it, and he held onto the root of a tree because he was trying to get out, but he wasn't strong enough, and stayed there until a young woman named Sujata came to give an offering, because that tree was a kind of a shrine. So she was going to give an offering to the god of the tree, and she saw something holding on to the tree that didn't look very human. Because this individual was so utterly emaciated. She could see his spine from the front, the bumps in his spine from his stomach, they say. His eyes were sunken deep in his head. All of his hair had just fallen out. He was struggling there. He was moving, not like a normal person. I don't know if any of you have ever seen someone that emaciated, but the movement is really very different, so weak. And so she thought perhaps this is the god of the tree. So she was amazed, and she was going to give him the offering, and then saw what was going on, and so she helped him out and gave him the offering. And so he had been in contact with a woman, and furthermore, he had eaten this offering, and so his friends in the path abandoned him because he had returned to luxury. We can imagine what they would do to us with the breakfasts that we have here. I don't know what they'd think. But they left him because he had rice and milk, and he was left alone, but somewhat nourished. And it occurred to him, this way hasn't worked either, and so I have to find my own way. And in thinking that thought, he remembered when he was 6 years old, and he had a certain very important experience, as many of us do when we're about that age, and he realized that that might be the way. That might be the way. That experience I had, that spiritual experience I had when I was 6, that might be the way. And so he went that way. And he entered jhana. He entered very significant spiritual states of absorption, and it seemed to be working. Well, somebody noticed. Somebody who was overseeing this whole process noticed and was not happy. Mara noticed. He thought, this guy might get free. This is terrible. I had him there for a while. I had him in that palace. He was all caught up in sensual pleasure. I feel like I'm going to win that game. I feel like in, 2,000, 2,500 years, I'm going to pretty much have everyone under that spell. I bet I can convince them to destroy the whole earth in order to get a bit more sensual pleasure. Ha! But anyway, back to the present. This guy didn't get trapped in that. He left. But fortunately, he then went and started abusing himself. Well, that's excellent. That's not going to work. You can indulge yourself. That's not going to work. Abuse yourself. That's not going to work. So I had him both times. But now, this isn't working. All of this non-conceptual awareness stuff. This is terrible. What am I going to do about it? I have to fight him. And so he pulled together his vast army of demons. And they all came to attack the bodhisattva, sitting under a tree. He liked trees a lot. Sitting under a tree, sitting under the Bodhi tree, they all came to attack. And I don't know if anyone here has ever experienced this particular army, but it's terrifying. It is terrifying. They are very skillful at causing mental confusion and bodily pain. They attacked him with their swords and their axes and their arrows and their darts, their spears and their lances. Vast arrays of monsters. As I say, some people here may have experienced this army. And it, for most of us, is overwhelming. We can't take it. We absolutely cannot take it. It's too much pain. It's too much fear. We can't handle it. It's too vast. And so we return to conceiving. We go back into our imaginary world, and we conclude, if we had a little bit of jhana, that we're enlightened, and we think, I'm enlightened. And Mara says, yes, good boy. That's right. Good girl. You're enlightened. Now go teach everybody. Go off. You've got this. We say, okay. They're coming to get us. And we think, I will be. I'll survive this. We think, I will not be. I'll be destroyed. Either way, Mara says, yes, very good. You go on like that. And then the army leaves, and we feel better. And we've been put back in line. However, the Bodhisattva was more sophisticated than this. Why? Simple. Because he had practiced ethical conduct for a long time. That's why. Please don't think, as is typically taught nowadays, that ethical conduct is meaningless, is not a part of the path. Don't believe the people who say that, yes, good news, you can walk this path and get enlightened and still be the same jerk you've always been. You don't have to make real changes. Certainly don't change your lifestyle. In fact, ideally, this path will enable you to further support the destructive economy of the world. Hopefully, this path goes with the stream, not against it. The Buddha is famous for saying, soon after his awakening, that this path goes against the stream, against the current of the world. Well, we typically fall into these traps, these conceivings, these waverings, these tremblings, these proliferations, these conceits. We fall into them. And then Mara leaves and we feel better. But if we have established clear ethics, if we've established the ability to constantly maintain compassion, then perhaps we can handle it when the army attacks. The army of demons attacks. And for most of us, we break down right away. He doesn't have to send his whole army. He sends one of his little demons, with like a needle, who just says, look out for the needle. And we say, okay, I'm doing really bad on this path. That's right. I am this. You nailed it. Whew. Then we can feel better again. If we're going to prepare for the actual army, we have to prepare for that with our actual choices. And that means that we maintain compassion all the time. Because at that moment, you're going to need compassion. It means we maintain equanimity all the time. Because at that moment, you're going to need equanimity. It means we maintain letting go, relinquishment all the time. Because you're going to need it at that moment. When they come and attack you, it will be the hardest moment of your life. It's not a joke. Some of us here know it, or at least know people who know it, and have heard it. I'm not going to get right now, at least with this group, into how bad it can really be. But it can be very, very bad. And at that moment, we have to do what the Bodhisattva did. And they had hurled their weapons at him, and he generated vast compassion and blanketed the army with compassion. And when the weapons came into that field of compassion, they magically transformed into flowers and gently caressed him, covering him in beauty. This is a real experience. Of course, we can see this as symbolism and such, but it's referring to an absolutely real experience, a real experience that some people here know. The worst possible pain suddenly becoming the most magnificent, gentle pleasure. Because of the vast compassion that we've cultivated in our bones due to the way that we've actually lived our lives. This isn't something you can just make up. Believe me, at that moment, everything you've made up, it just falls away. It doesn't matter. It has to be the way you've actually sacrificed. You have to pay for this ability to have compassion. So, the Bodhisattva brought forth great compassion. The weapons turned into flowers, and the army retreated. But Mara had one final weapon. And so he himself went up to the Bodhisattva under that tree. He himself faced him. And he asked him, "What right do you have to walk this path? Who are you to do this? What witness do you have who can claim that you have the right to break free. And again, because of the way the Bodhisattva had actually lived his life, he could reach down and touch the earth. And she shook. She trembled to demonstrate her witness to his right to walk the path. Please, if you need to toss aside, avoid, not learn from the first part of this story about the demons, fine. But please take this part seriously. This part is very, very important. Have we ourselves directly experienced this earth-trembling moment when we realize we can do this? As many of you know, I trained for some time in China. I had already trained in Japan, and one of the Zen masters of Chinese history from the late Tang Dynasty, who most inspired me, is named Seppo Zenji. And does anyone speak any Chinese language here? Which ones? Or what do you speak? Mandarin? Oh, in Cantonese, how do you say snow? It's shui feng. Feng is the peak of a mountain, the top of a mountain. Yeah. How do you say it in Chinese or in Mandarin? Does either of you know? It's something like shui feng, something like that. Shui, snow mountain, snow peak. It's feng though. That's the word, feng. Yeah. Anyway, his name is something like shui feng, and in Japanese, which I speak much better, it's Seppo. So Seppo Zenji inspired me, led me on, because he, like me, was a hopeless case. One of these people who can't meditate, who's afraid of everything, very afraid of death, and fails for a long time. So I found his story to be very encouraging. And I went to China. I was in South China, in Fujian, and I got on a bus. Just got on a bus with my stuff, and I was on a bus for a long time. And I didn't know where I was going. And I suddenly realized it's time to get off of this bus. The bus was stopping, and I realized, this is it. This is the stop. And I quickly grabbed my bag, and I jumped off the bus, even though I had paid for much further. And I looked around, and I was amazingly right near a huge temple. And I walked past this beautiful lake with a Guanyin, a Kannon, Avalokiteshvara statue, which was just magnificent. And I walked and got to the temple and met some of the monks. And it turned out that I could stay there. I wandered around, and suddenly, I don't have a lot of time, but it was an amazing story. I suddenly realized that I was at Seppo Zenji's temple where he taught. Now, for those of you who don't know, China is big. I mean, it's amazing. It's just incredible. It's impossible that this happened. Of all of the temples that I would have wanted to go to and train at, that's the one. And I just ended up there. I couldn't believe it. When one of the monks told me that this temple is called Shui Feng Su, something like that, however you say it. My pronunciation is just terrible. But Seppoji, this is Seppo's temple. I just assumed they must be talking about a different one, It's impossible. It didn't even cross my mind that this is really his temple until I went and found its amazing monument, and I could read enough to read enough about the biography of the person on this, of the person described, that this is really Seppo. This is him. This is his temple. I am here. Those are his ashes. I mean, he stood here. I was completely overwhelmed by the fact that I was at this temple. I was walking literally on the same places where he walked. That is incredible. So I trained there for quite a while and had a very good experience there. And I wanted to tell you a bit about him. He, as I say, was a hopeless case. He trained under a number of people, but his two primary teachers were Tozan Zenji and Toksan Zenji. Tozan Zenji was the founder of the Soto school of Zen. And one day, he was sifting rice in the old-fashioned way to take the stones out. Any of you ever done this? None of you ever done this? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, very good. You've done this. You know, you have the straw and and then you get out the little piece of gravel and sand and stuff, and then you keep going. Then you eventually, it's good enough, and you pour it into your pot. And it takes forever. Did you find that it was boring and interminable?
I was a child, so yes.
Yes, it was terrible. I was a monk when I was doing it. It was awful in India. It goes forever. And you do it and do it and do it, and then you have very little rice. So there's such a temptation, as you may know, to not do it very well. It is good enough. Someone else will probably break their tooth on that piece of gravel, whatever. So he, Seppo, at Tozan's temple was the cook, because he was usually the cook because he was so compassionate, he was so caring. He wanted to make the training as easy as possible for everyone else. Not for him. And so he worked very hard. And being the cook at these temples was very hard because they had hundreds of monks. At Seppoji, the rice pot, their old rice pot that they used when there were 3,000 people there, it's huge. Just huge. It would fit in this rectangle here. But there wouldn't be a lot of space around it. It was a huge rice pot. I don't know how you cook rice in a rice pot that big. They had a huge fire under it. Nowadays, they just use a rice pot that's as big as maybe a hot tub, because there are only several hundred people there. And just so you know, the place feels abandoned. There are several hundred people living there, and it feels abandoned, because there used to be 3,000 people living there. So it's just amazing. So he was sifting rice like this for hundreds of people. And he had his pot somewhat filled. And Tozan, his master, came into the kitchen and saw what was happening. And at that time, there was no interview. There was no sanzen. It's just any time you saw the master was already sanzen. And so Tozan came into the kitchen and asked him an excellent question. He said, "So, are you separating the rice from the rocks, or the rocks from the rice?" Good question, isn't it? And Seppo had to say something. He wasn't enlightened yet, but he's not just hanging out at summer camp. He's giving his life to this. And so the master is asking him a question. He has to say something. And so he stood up. He said, "I'm separating them both at exactly the same time." And Tozan said, "Well, in that case, what will everyone eat?" And so Seppo kicked over the rice pot. rice went everywhere. And Tozan said, that's a pretty good answer. That's good. I appreciate your effort. But I think you should train under someone else. I think you should train under Tokuzan, because his personality is more like yours. Tokuzan was a very stern Zen master. His famous teaching was 30 blows if you speak and 30 blows if you don't speak. So it was time for Seppo to leave, so he packed up and he went to the gate, and Tozan kindly walked him out. They went to the gate and he was going to go, and Tozan asked him, so when you came here, how did you get here? He said, I took a path through these mountains. Tozan said, and now that you're leaving, how will you go? He said, I'll actually take the same path. And Tozan said, have you met the person who doesn't take the path through the mountains? And Seppo, again, right there. You got to deal with it. You're with the teacher. You're never off. And so he said, no, I haven't met him. I don't know him. And Tozan said, why? Why not? Why haven't you met him? And he said, because he doesn't have a face. And Tozan said, if you haven't met him, how do you know he doesn't have a face? And again, Seppo was stuck. So he had to leave without anything to say. So he left. And he went to Tokuzan's place, where he met Ganto Zenji, a brother in the Dharma. Sort of like you all have met each other here. They became very good friends. Ganto was the opposite of Seppo. He didn't have to work hard at all because he was a total spiritual genius. He was one of these very rare cases who had a very easy time on the path. When he first came and met Tokuzan saw him and was astonished at this incredible student. And he asked him right away, how have you become so stupid? How have you become so empty-minded? How have you become such a fool? Not like all these other people who are filled with extraneous thinking and clever ideas. There's nothing going on in your mind at all. You're a complete idiot. How did you get to this state? And he answered very clearly. Ganto said many things that we should take as a standard in our practice. And one of them was, he answered this question by saying, for my whole life, I will not deceive myself. I refuse to deceive myself for my whole life. It's a wonderful statement. This is truly the heart of the path. It's truly the heart of the path, for us to come to that clear determination. Not like most of us who spend our whole lives deceiving ourselves. For my whole life, I will not deceive myself. So, they met and they trained together, and after some time, they left together in order to go on pilgrimage and meet lots of different teachers. And while on pilgrimage, they stopped at an inn because there was a big snowstorm, even bigger than the one we just had. Really big snowstorm. It snowed several feet and it snowed for days. And so they were just stuck in a little room in an inn. And the whole time, Seppo sat, meditated. And the whole time, Ganto slept and snored. He was already fully enlightened. Seppo was not. So Seppo was working hard, but he couldn't stand the snoring. Snoring was driving him crazy. Even though he was such a compassionate guy, there's a limit. So finally, he turned and he said, "Brother, get up and meditate. You're a monk. You're supposed to maintain mindfulness and clear comprehension all the time. You can't just sleep." And Ganto got up and rubbed his eyes and said, "Listen, you look weird. The innkeeper is going to think we're weird. You're just sitting there all day long. No one does that. What are you doing there?" And finally it really came out. And Seppo hit his chest and he said, I feel such pain here. I feel such insecurity, such fear. I don't know what to do about it. I've had it, and I've tried to train, and I've trained under this person, that person, at this temple, and that temple, and it hasn't resolved it. I can't give up, because I can't live this way. So Ganto said, oh, I see. Well, in that case, why don't you tell me about the various experiences you've had, and I'll clear up your doubts for you. I'll tell you what you've experienced that's worked and what is extraneous. Seppo said, okay. So he told him about the various experiences he'd had while practicing. And each time Ganto said, no, that's not it. Then anything else? And he told him another. He said, no, that's completely the wrong path. Anything else? And he told him, oh, no. So, finally, Seppo didn't have anything else to share. And he sat there, silent. And Ganto kindly instructed him. And he told him, the family treasure doesn't come from outside. So this, I know Zen is often hard to understand for good reason because it's impossible to understand, but when it's possible to understand, you should just understand it. This is poetic, but it's certainly not incomprehensible. You have a sense of what it means to say the family treasure doesn't come from outside? A little bit. So it just means that you have a family, say it's a wealthy family, they have something. They have their own family heirlooms. You don't go out to get your family treasure. You already have your family treasure. You would use the treasure to get other things. So he's saying you've been looking outside for your own treasure. You've been hoping you go to this place and that place and finally acquire enlightenment. But it doesn't work that way. And he told him, if you want to bring forth a great teaching, care for many people, then it has to burst forth from your own heart and cover the earth. And at that moment, finally, Seppo awoke. He finally broke through. This bursting forth, what is that? Well, Dai Zenji, another teacher from the Song dynasty, great Zen master, is very clear about this. Because this is this moment's awareness, this present awareness. That's what bursts forth and covers the earth. We can say, I'm in pain, but somehow we're aware of that. We can say, I'm happy, but somehow we're aware of that. We can say, that's a floor. We can say, this is a body. We could say, I have a self or I don't have a self. I like you or I don't. Somehow we're aware of that. Somehow. It's mysterious. Seppo realized that. And again, these words of Ganto are a standard that we can use in our own training. There is a famous story from the Lotus Sutra about a man, a very wealthy man, who had a son. And they were out one day, in the marketplace, and somehow, suddenly, his son was gone. Maybe you know what this is like. You have your kid right with you, you look around, you look away, and then they're just gone. And he searched and searched, as you would, hopelessly, frantically, desperately. And he couldn't find him. And you can imagine, or you can know, we can imagine, what it would be like to lose your child. But that's how it was. And despite the fact that he was depressed, he had to get on with his life. And so he went on with his life for 10 years, 15 years. Attempting to move through the pain of having lost his child. Moving through his life, his various responsibilities, never forgetting his son, his love for his child. Then one day he was upstairs in his mansion, in his estate, looking out of the window over the storehouses filled with gold and jewels, over the plantations, over the gardens, many servants working. And he saw at the front gate a beggar, a poor, disheveled, dirty beggar, coming to the gate of this big house and asking for a little handout. He was amazed. He realized, that's him. That's my son. I lost him all those years ago when he was just a boy. And now I see him again, finally. And he told his servants, quickly, go get that guy. Bring him in. I want to see him. So the servants ran out. And he'd just gotten a little handout from one of the other servants. And he was walking away from the gate. The other servants came running. They left, and they went out of the gate. And they told him, please, come with us. Come with us in here. And he was terrified, of course. He knew, I don't belong in a place like that. He said, oh no, I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I was just coming by. He said, oh no, you should come with us. And he, of course, thought that they were going to beat him, hurt him. He said, oh no, I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I'll never come back, I promise. He said, no, please come. He said, no, I'm leaving now. And he started to run away. But one of the servants took him by the arm, and he was so frightened that he fainted. So they didn't know what to do, so they just took him and they brought him in. And the old man saw him up close, and he knew, it's true, this is my son. It's incredible. But they told him what had happened. And so the old man, very wise, caring, loving, he had to come up with some plan, some way of finally managing a true reunion with his child. So he said, okay, well, if he's so afraid to come here, then that's fine. Just bring him back out, lay him down on the street. And when he revives, if you recall, we do have that job that nobody wants. It's a really bad job. You could just give it to this guy. That job that is awful, terrible, we can't find anyone to fill it. He might fill it. And I thought, okay, that's true, maybe he would. So they brought him back out and he revived. And they said, we're really sorry. We didn't mean to frighten you. We just wanted to let you know that it looks like you have a pretty bad life. And we have this job opening. And it's just cleaning, but maybe you'd want to do it because it doesn't look like you have anything else going on. You don't have to be smart to do it. You don't have to be very disciplined. You don't have to be good at anything. And you look like a person who's not good at anything. So maybe it's a good job for you. And he thought, yeah, I am a person who's not good at anything. Maybe that is a good job for me. And he said, yeah, you get a little bit of money, some new clothes, if you want it. I said, well, I guess I could give it a try. They said, right, worst thing that happens is we just fire you, kick you back out, and then you're in your same situation. I said, okay, I guess I'll give it a try. I'll probably get fired, but I've been doing this too long. So he went on in, and he came through the back gate, and they gave him the worst room in the whole facility, and the old man had to watch this from his window. So he did that job, and he did okay at it. He did a good job. He got to know it. He gained a little confidence. So they said, all right, well, you're doing better. We'll give you a little bit of a better job now. We'll promote you. We'll have you clean out the stables. It's a terrible, dirty job. It's really bad. It's disgusting. But it seems like it would fit someone like you. You're pretty disgusting. He thought, okay, that does seem like it's good for me. So for years, he cleaned out the stables. It was a big responsibility, actually. He had to plan it out. He had to figure out how to do it. He had to deal with the horses. He had to deal with the manure. And he had to deal with the other people. And he got to know the other servants there. And after many years, the old man said, all right, he's been doing pretty good at cleaning out the stables. Let's promote him again. Why don't we bring him in here and he can take care of the rooms? So they went down to him and they said, you've been working here for quite a while. Why don't you come in and work inside and take care of the rooms? He thought, what, me? Take care of that nice mansion? Well, I guess I have really shown that I can do a good job. This is amazing. I never thought I could do anything that took this much work and responsibility. But maybe I can do that. I guess I'll give it a try. I said, all right, good. He was promoted again and he started working on the rooms. Did that for many years, and then finally, the old man said, I'm coming to my last years, and I need someone to help me out, an assistant, a personal assistant, help me out with all of the most complicated issues here, with this estate, with the storehouses, with the agriculture, the relationships with the neighbors, with the giving that we do in our community. I need help with all this. Why don't we have him do it? So they went to him and they offered him that job, and he thought, gosh, that's incredible. I've worked my way up through hard work. I've worked my way up, and now I'm an assistant to the master, the owner of this entire estate. That's amazing. But he had the confidence then to step forward and take over those responsibilities and learn everything. And everyone there was happy to work with him because he'd gotten to know them. He came up from the very bottom. He was beneath all of them. He knew what it was like to be in their position. So he did a very good job. And then finally, the day came. The old man brought everyone together, and he even brought his son up to the front of the room with him, and he told him and everyone, "This is my son. This is my true son. He has always owned all of this. All of this has always been his. He never had to work for it. This is completely his." And finally, the two of them could truly reunite.